Research centers study human laboratories because efficiency is remarkable. Part 1. Doctor had seen a lot in her 300 years as a researcher. She had visited laboratories on ice worlds where scientists worked in temperatures that would freeze most beings solid. She had observed research facilities floating in gas giants, held together by gravity manipulation that her own species had taken to perfect. She had documented the great thinking pools of Dimension 12, where entire civilizations shared one massive consciousness to solve problems together. But she had never seen anything like the humans. The discovery happened by accident, as most great discoveries do. The research collective had been conducting their standard survey of developing civilizations. Earth was supposed to be just another entry in their database. A young species, barely able to leave their own planet, using primitive chemical rockets and simple computers. The IRC's job was to catalog them and move on. Then someone noticed the numbers didn't make sense. "Director, you need to see this," her assistant said, his tentacles waving with agitation. Was normally calm, even boring. Seeing him excited was unusual enough to make pay attention. She floated over to his workstation, her crystalline body refracting the soft light of the observation deck. "What is it?" "The humans, their scientific output. I've run the calculations 3 times and they keep coming back wrong." "Wrong how?" Pulled up a holographic display. Charts and graphs filled the air between them, glowing in various colors. According to their technology level, humans should be making maybe 10 to 15 major breakthroughs per standard cycle, but they're producing over 200. Stared at the numbers. "That's impossible, check your instruments." "I did twice. The instruments are fine, it's the humans who don't make sense." Over the next few days, had her entire team verify the data. They checked and rechecked. They looked for errors in their observation methods. They considered whether they had human technology levels, but every analysis came back the same. Humans were achieving results that shouldn't be possible. Their laboratories were tiny compared to the massive research complexes of more advanced species. Their equipment was primitive, sometimes held together with materials that the IRC database classified as improvised adhesives and hope. Their computers were laughably slow. Their research budgets were so small that some civilizations spent more on a single experiment than humans spent on entire facilities. Yet somehow they kept making discoveries. New medicines, novel materials, unexpected insights into physics and chemistry. They published papers at a rate that seemed almost frantic. Their researchers worked in conditions that would make most beings quit and find easier jobs. "I don't understand it," said to her team during their weekly meeting. "By every metric we have, human laboratories should be mediocre at best, but they're not. They're extraordinary." "Perhaps we're measuring wrong," suggested Doctor, a floating sphere of concentrated thought energy from Dimension 9. "Perhaps there's something about their methods we're not seeing." "Then we need to look closer," decided. "I'm calling for a full observational study. I want teams embedded near their major research facilities. I want every aspect of their laboratory work documented and analyzed." The proposal went to the IRC Council, a gathering of the greatest minds from across the multiverse, presented her findings, showing the impossible efficiency of human research. The council members were skeptical at first. Humans were barely past their industrial age. What could they possibly teach civilizations that had mastered interstellar travel and quantum manipulation? But the numbers spoke for themselves. The council approved the study with a unanimous vote. It would be the largest observation project the IRC had ever conducted for a single species. Assembled her team carefully. She needed experts in multiple fields, beings who could observe and analyze without letting their own biases interfere. She chose Doctor for his ability to process information without emotion. She selected because his attention to detail was unmatched. She brought in specialists in biology, chemistry, physics, and psychology from a dozen different dimensions. They gathered in the observation ship, a vessel that existed slightly out of phase with normal reality. Humans wouldn't be able to see them or detect them. They would be ghosts, watching and recording but never interfering. "Our mission is simple," told her team as Earth filled the before them. "We need to understand how humans achieve so much with so little. What makes their laboratories so effective? What are they doing that we're not?" "Maybe they're just lucky," suggested. "No species is lucky for this long," replied. "There's something else happening here, something we don't understand yet, and we're going to figure out what it is." They spread out across the planet, each team member taking a different facility. Chose a university laboratory on the east coast of a continent the humans called North America. It was mid-sized by human standards, focused on medical research. According to their files, this laboratory had produced 17 major papers in the last year alone, including 3 breakthroughs in cancer treatment. When first saw the laboratory, she thought there had been a mistake. The building was old, its walls showing cracks that needed repair. The equipment inside was outdated, some of it decades past what the IRC would consider acceptable for precision work. The whole place had a worn, tired feeling to it. Then she watched the humans work. There was a young female researcher named Sarah, barely into her 3rd decade of life. According to human standards, she was still a student, working on something they called a doctorate. She arrived at the laboratory early in the morning, carrying a large cup of steaming liquid that the IRC database identified as coffee. Sarah went to a large machine, something used to analyze molecular structures. She pressed a button. Nothing happened. She pressed it again. Still nothing. Instead of calling for a repair technician like any sensible being would, Sarah grabbed a tool kit and opened the machine herself. Watched in fascination as Sarah identified the problem, a broken connection deep inside the machine. The proper fix would require ordering a replacement part and waiting for it to arrive. Sarah didn't wait. She took a roll of silver adhesive tape from a drawer, tore off a piece, and used it to repair the connection. Then she used a piece of wire to reinforce it. Within 20 minutes, the machine was running again. "Did she just fix a precision instrument with tape?" asked out loud, even though no one could hear her. Sarah ran her samples through the repaired machine, humming quietly to herself. The results came back perfect. The machine worked just as well as it had before, maybe better. Over the next few days, documented dozens of similar incidents. A microscope held together with what humans call duct tape. A computer that should have crashed years ago, kept running through sheer determination and constant maintenance. Equipment that had been modified so many times it barely resembled its original design. The humans didn't seem to see any problem with this. They treated broken equipment as a puzzle to solve, not a reason to stop working. When something failed, they fixed it. When they didn't have the right tools, they made do with what they had. When proper repairs were too expensive, they improvised. But it wasn't just the improvisation that caught attention. It was the hours. Sarah regularly stayed in the laboratory until late at night. She would arrive at dawn and still be there when the sun set. And she wasn't alone. Other researchers kept similar schedules, working long past when they should have been exhausted. The coffee seemed to help. Humans consumed enormous amounts of it, drinking cup after cup throughout the day. Had her team analyze the substance. It was a mild stimulant, nothing that should allow for the kind of extended work sessions humans regularly performed. Yet somehow, it did. Then there was the incident with Dr., one of the senior researchers at the facility. His grant application had been rejected, his funding cut. According to the IRC's models, this should have slowed his research considerably. Instead, seemed to become more determined. He worked longer hours. He pushed his team harder. Within 3 months, he had published a paper that directly contradicted the review committee's reasons for rejecting his grant. "I'll show them," heard him mutter one evening, hunched over his computer. "They think this won't work. I'll prove them all wrong." sent her observations back to the main ship. The other team members were reporting similar findings. Human laboratories operated in ways that shouldn't work but somehow did. The researchers pushed themselves beyond reasonable limits. They made do with inadequate resources. They turned setbacks into motivation. And they kept making discoveries. Part 2. 3 months into the observation, had filled hundreds of data files with her observations. Each day brought new examples of human researchers doing things that made no sense by conventional standards. The more she watched, the more questions she had. One morning, she observed a laboratory meeting. 10 researchers crowded into a small room, sitting around a table that had seen better days. They had gathered to discuss a problem. One of their experiments kept producing inconsistent results, and no one could figure out why. "Maybe the temperature isn't stable enough," suggested a young man named. "We checked that already," Sarah replied, tapping her pen against her notebook. 3 times. "What about contamination?" another researcher asked. "Ruled it out." The discussion continued, ideas flying back and forth. Some suggestions were obviously wrong, basic mistakes that any trained scientist should have caught, but no one mocked the bad ideas. Instead, they built on them. One wrong idea would spark a thought in someone else, leading to a different suggestion, which would trigger another insight. Had observed countless research meetings across the multiverse. They usually followed strict protocols. The senior researcher would speak first, laying out the problem. Junior members would listen respectfully. Solutions would be proposed in order of rank. Everything was organized and hierarchical. This meeting was chaos. People interrupted each other. They argued. They laughed when someone made a joke. The senior researcher doctor contributed no more than anyone else. A graduate student challenged his assumptions directly and just nodded and said, "You might be right. Let's test it." Then 40 minutes into the meeting, Sarah suddenly sat up straight. "Wait, what if it's not the samples at all? What if the problem is in how we're storing them?" The room went quiet. Everyone stared at her. "The storage solution," Sarah continued, speaking faster now. "We've been using the standard formula, but what if it's degrading faster than the specifications say? These are older containers. Maybe the plastic is breaking down and contaminating everything." Pulled out his phone and started searching. The manufacturer had a recall 2 years ago for exactly that reason. The room erupted in excited conversation. They had found the problem, and the solution came from someone thinking sideways, approaching the question from an unexpected angle. Within an hour, they had ordered new containers and redesigned their storage protocol. Added this to her growing file of observations. Human research meetings were inefficient by normal standards, but they produced results. The lack of strict hierarchy meant good ideas could come from anywhere. The chaotic discussion sparked creativity that a more organized approach might have missed. She watched Sarah for the rest of the day. After the meeting, Sarah went back to her bench and started running experiments. She worked through lunch, eating a sandwich with one hand while pipetting solutions with the other. Around 3 in the afternoon, she made her 3rd cup of coffee. At 6, when most researchers were leaving, Sarah stayed. At 8, she was still there. At 10, she finally packed up her things, but not before carefully preparing samples for the next morning. "Why do you work so hard?" wondered aloud, her voice echoing in her observation pod. The next day, she got her answer. Sarah met with Doctor in his office. Through the observation equipment, listened to their conversation. "How's your mother doing?" asked. Sarah's expression tightened. "Not great. The treatments aren't working as well as we hoped." "I'm sorry." "It's why I'm here," Sarah said quietly. "I know the work we're doing might not help her. We're years away from human trials, decades maybe, but someone's mother will be helped. Someone's daughter or sister or friend. That has to mean something." Nodded. "It does. And for what it's worth, you're doing excellent work." After Sarah left, sat in silence, processing what she had heard. This wasn't just about curiosity or career advancement. Sarah had a personal reason for her dedication. Her research wasn't an abstract exercise. It mattered to her in a deep, emotional way. Check the other observation teams. Similar patterns emerged everywhere. A physicist whose brother had died in an accident, now researching new safety materials. A chemist who grew up in poverty, developing cheaper ways to purify water. An engineer who survived a fire, designing better detection systems. Not all humans had such dramatic motivations, but they all had something. They cared about their work in ways that went beyond professional obligation. They were emotionally invested in the outcomes. This was strange too. In her own species, research was pursued logically. You identified a question, developed a methodology, collected data, and drew conclusions. Emotions weren't part of the process. They were something you experienced in your personal life, separate from your work. But humans seemed to blend everything together. Their work was personal. Their personal lives influenced their work. The boundaries that other species maintained so carefully didn't really exist for them. She observed another pattern too. When experiments failed, human researchers didn't just note the failure and move on. They took it personally. She watched throw a pipette across the room when a month's worth of work produced nothing useful. She saw Sarah put her head down on her desk, shoulders shaking with frustration. But then they got up and tried again. The emotional investment that made failures hurt also made them refuse to quit. They were stubborn in a way had never encountered before. There was an incident that crystallized everything for her. A piece of equipment broke down, something important that would take weeks to replace. The laboratory didn't have the budget to rush order a new one. By any reasonable measure, this should have stopped their research cold. Instead, the entire laboratory gathered to brainstorm solutions. Could they borrow equipment from another facility? Could they modify something else to do the same job? Could they redesign their experiments to work around the missing equipment? Someone suggested they just build their own version. Everyone else laughed, but then they started discussing whether it was actually possible. They looked up patents and schematics. They raided the storage room for spare parts. They called in favors from colleagues at other institutions. 2 weeks later, they had a working prototype. It wasn't as sophisticated as the commercial version, but it did what they needed. The cost? About 1/10 of what the proper equipment would have been. The secret? Determination and a refusal to accept that obstacles were permanent. Filed her report with a growing sense of wonder. Human researchers operate under constraints that would cripple most civilizations. Limited resources, inadequate equipment, time pressure, and personal stress. Yet they produce extraordinary results because they refuse to accept limitations. They treat every problem as solvable and every setback as temporary. But she still didn't understand the full picture. There were pieces missing from the puzzle. One evening, she watched Sarah working late again. The young researcher had been running the same experiment all week, trying to optimize a new treatment protocol. Each attempt had failed. Each time, the results were slightly different but never quite right. Around midnight, Sarah made yet another cup of coffee. She stood at her bench, staring at her notes, exhaustion evident in every line of her body. Then she saw something. Her eyes widened. She grabbed a pen and started writing frantically, covering page after page with calculations and sketches. At 2 in the morning, Sarah started a new experiment. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency despite the late hour. She was testing something, some idea that had come to her in that moment of exhaustion. 3 hours later, she had results. Good results. Results that made her pump her fist in the air and laugh with pure joy. Had witnessed what humans called a breakthrough, but what caused it? Was it the long hours, the caffeine, the emotional investment, or was it something else entirely? She compiled all her observations and sent them to the main ship. The other team members reported similar incidents, breakthroughs happening at odd hours, solutions coming from unexpected sources, progress made through sheer stubborn persistence. The IRC team had been observing for 6 months now. They had gathered more data on human laboratories than any previous study of its kind, but felt like they were still missing something fundamental. They were documenting what humans did, but not really understanding why it worked. "We need to present our findings," Doctor said during their weekly conference. "The council is asking for preliminary results." "But we don't have answers yet," protested. "We have observations, but we don't understand the underlying principles." "Maybe that's the point," suggested. "Maybe human laboratory efficiency doesn't follow principles we can understand. Maybe it's something unique to them." Considered this. She had always believed that scientific progress followed universal rules. The same methods should work everywhere for every species. But what if that wasn't true? What if different species needed different approaches? "Prepare the data," she said finally. "We'll present what we have and let the council decide what it means." Part 3. The Nexus Observatory was the largest gathering place in the multiverse. It existed in all dimensions simultaneously, a space where beings from countless realities could meet and exchange ideas. Had presented research here before, but never to an audience this large. The auditorium filled with scientists from across known space. Some had bodies, some were pure energy, some existed as mathematical concepts that had gained consciousness. All of them had come to hear about the humans and their impossible laboratories. Took her position at the center of the presentation sphere. Around her, holographic displays materialized, showing everything her team had observed over the past 6 months. "We began this study expecting to document inefficiency," she started. "Humans are a young species with primitive technology. By every metric we normally use to evaluate research capabilities, they should be unremarkable. Instead, we found something extraordinary." She brought up the first set of data, showing human scientific output compared to other civilizations at similar technological levels. The difference was striking. Humans published more papers, made more discoveries, and achieved more breakthroughs than species that were centuries more advanced. Our initial hypothesis was that we had miscalculated their technological level, so we checked multiple times. The measurements were accurate. Human technology is primitive by our standards. Their laboratories are small, their equipment outdated, their budgets inadequate. Yet they achieve results that rival or exceed civilizations with vastly superior resources. Murmurs ran through the audience. This was interesting but not yet convincing. Any species could get lucky for a short period. "So we went deeper," continued. "We embedded observation teams at multiple human research facilities. We documented their methods, their practices, their entire approach to scientific investigation. What we found challenged many of our assumptions about how research should work." She showed the footage of Sarah repairing the spectrometer with tape. The audience reacted with confusion. Some laughed, thinking it was a joke. "This is not an isolated incident," said. "We documented hundreds of similar cases. Humans routinely repair sophisticated equipment with improvised materials. They modify instruments far beyond their original specifications. They keep using technology that other species would have discarded decades ago, and somehow it works." She showed more examples. The laboratory meetings with their chaotic discussions, the long hours that humans regularly worked, the way they pushed through exhaustion and setbacks, the emotional investment that drove their research. "We analyzed their primary cognitive enhancement substance, which they call coffee," said, bringing up chemical diagrams. "It's a mild stimulant that provides a temporary boost in alertness. According to our models, its effects should be minimal. Yet we observed that human productivity increases dramatically when they consume it. Some researchers consume 10 or more cups per day." A being made of swirling gas raised a question. How is this sustainable? Surely such work habits lead to burnout and decreased long-term productivity. You would think so, agreed. But we found that humans actually thrive under these conditions. The pressure seems to focus them. The constraints force creativity. They don't just tolerate difficult working conditions, in many cases, they seem to need them. She showed the data on spite-driven research, how human productivity increased when they were told something was impossible or when their work was rejected. The audience found this particularly baffling. We call this the challenge response, explained. When humans face obstacles, a significant percentage respond by working harder rather than seeking easier alternatives. Being told they can't do something activates what appears to be a competitive drive, even when the competition is purely abstract. Doctor took over the presentation, his thought patterns creating visual displays in the air. We analyzed the social structures within human laboratories. They lack the strict hierarchies we see in most advanced civilizations. Junior researchers regularly challenge senior ones. Ideas are debated openly rather than accepted based on authority. This should lead to conflict and inefficiency. Instead, it produces rapid innovation. He showed examples of breakthrough moments, like Sarah's late-night insight about the storage containers. Human researchers have what they call aha moments, sudden realizations that come after extended periods of focused work. These moments often occur during rest or when the conscious mind is occupied with other tasks. It appears that human brains continue processing problems unconsciously, sometimes producing solutions when least expected. Presented the data on emotional investment. He showed the correlation between personal motivation and research productivity. Humans who have emotional reasons for their work, family illness, personal experience, strongly held beliefs, consistently outperform those who don't. This contradicts the established understanding that emotions interfere with objective analysis. The audience was fully engaged now. Questions came from all directions. How did humans maintain focus with so much chaos? Why didn't their improvised equipment fail more often? What prevented burnout when they worked such long hours? Return to the center. We asked ourselves the same questions. The answer, we believe, lies in how humans evolved. They developed on a world with limited resources and significant competition. For most of their history, survival required adaptability, persistence, and creative problem-solving. These traits became deeply embedded in their psychology. She brought up comparative evolution charts. Most spacefaring species evolved in more stable environments. We learned to plan carefully, allocate resources efficiently, and avoid unnecessary risks. These are valuable traits for building civilizations, but humans evolved differently. They learned to take risks, to push beyond safe limits, to find solutions when none seemed possible. Their laboratories reflect this evolutionary background, Doctor added. What we see as chaos, they experience as normal working conditions. What we see as inadequate resources, they see as a puzzle to solve. What we see as obstacles, they see as challenges to overcome. Showed footage of the laboratory celebrating when Sarah's late-night experiment succeeded. The humans hugged, high-fived, and cheered. Some had tears in their eyes. It was pure, unrestrained joy. This is perhaps the most important finding, said quietly. Humans don't just conduct research, they care about it deeply. Their work is not separate from their emotions but intertwined with them. They celebrate successes together and support each other through failures. This emotional connection creates a social environment that encourages risk-taking and persistence. She paused, letting this sink in. We have resources they can only dream of. Our equipment is centuries more advanced. Our facilities are vast and well-funded. We have time and stability that young civilizations rarely experience. Yet humans achieve comparable results with a fraction of what we have. The question we must ask ourselves is, what are they doing right that we're doing wrong? The auditorium erupted in discussion. Some scientists rejected the idea that human methods had anything to teach advanced civilizations. Others argued that emotional investment was incompatible with objective research. A few suggested that humans were simply lucky and would eventually regress to the mean. But many were intrigued. If humans could achieve so much with so little, what could other species learn from them? An ancient being that existed as a pattern in quantum foam asked the crucial question: what is your recommendation? Should we attempt to replicate human laboratory conditions? Had prepared for this question, she had spent weeks formulating her answer. Not exactly, she said. Human methods work for humans because they align with human psychology and evolution. Simply copying their practices would not work for species with different backgrounds, but we can learn principles from them. She created a list in the air, each point highlighted and explained. First, humans have taught us that constraints can drive innovation rather than hinder it. We may be making our research too comfortable, too easy. Limited resources force creative solutions. Second, humans show us the value of chaos in controlled environments. Not disorder for its own sake, but flexible structures that allow ideas to come from anywhere. Third, they demonstrate that emotional investment in research is not a weakness but potentially a strength. When scientists care deeply about outcomes, they work harder and think more creatively. Fourth, humans prove that persistence often matters more than perfect planning. Their willingness to try, fail, and try again leads to discoveries that more cautious approaches might miss. She looked around the auditorium. Most importantly, humans remind us why we do research in the first place, not just to accumulate knowledge, but to solve problems and help others. That sense of purpose drives everything they do. The presentation ended with a recommendation that shocked many in attendance. The IRC would establish a permanent observation post around Earth, not to study what humans were researching, but to continue learning how they researched. Other civilizations were encouraged to send their own observers. In the weeks that followed, reports spread across the multiverse. Laboratories began experimenting with human-inspired methods. Some tried reducing their equipment budgets to encourage improvisation. Others relaxed their hierarchies to allow more open debate. A few even introduced coffee, though the results were mixed since other species didn't respond to it the same way. Returned to Earth to continue her observations. She had discovered something unexpected during her study. She actually enjoyed watching the humans work. Their enthusiasm was contagious, even across the dimensional barrier that separated her from them. One evening, she watched Sarah defend her doctoral dissertation. The young researcher presented years of work, answering questions from a committee of senior scientists. When it was over and they told her she had passed, Sarah's joy was so pure and genuine that found herself wishing she could celebrate with her. "They don't know we're watching," said, joining her in the observation pod. "They have no idea they've become famous across the multiverse." "Maybe that's better," replied. "They're not performing for us, they're just being themselves." She thought about everything she had learned: the improvisation and determination, the spite-driven breakthroughs and caffeine-fueled marathons, the emotional connections and collaborative chaos, all the things that made human laboratories special. "Do you think other species can really learn from them?" asked. "I think we already have," said. "We've learned that there's more than one way to pursue knowledge. We've learned that sometimes the best tools aren't the most advanced ones, but the ones you refuse to let stop you. We've learned that caring about your work isn't unprofessional, it might be essential." Down on Earth, Sarah left the university building, her new doctorate certificate in hand. She pulled out her phone and called her mother to share the news. Through the observation equipment, heard her voice, bright with happiness. "We did it, Mom. It's not too late for you, but it might help someone else. That's what matters, right?" Added one final note to her report. Humans achieve the extraordinary not despite their limitations, but because of how they respond to them. They've turned scarcity into creativity, obstacles into challenges, and setbacks into motivation. They work with passion, improvise with confidence, and persist with stubbornness. These qualities have made them one of the most efficient research species we've ever observed. As they continue to develop, we can only imagine what they'll achieve when they finally have the resources to match their determination. She filed the report and settled in for another shift of observation. There was still so much to learn from the humans, these remarkable beings who refused to let the impossible stay impossible, one improvised solution at a time.